The silence that followed her words was not empty. It was a dense, heavy thing, filled with the jagged shards of what had just been broken. It pressed down on me, stealing the air from my lungs, muffling the frantic beat of my own heart. I stared at my daughter, Emily, my only child, and saw not the girl I had raised, but a stranger whose face was contorted by a rage so potent it seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. The best gift would be if you just died. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed and embedded themselves instantly into the softest part of my soul. It wasn't the shout that wounded me most. It was the chilling conviction in her eyes. She meant it. In that moment, standing in the middle of the living room we had once decorated together with laughter and paint-splattered hands, my daughter wished me dead. The argument had started, as they often did, over money. It was a subject that had become a chasm between us over the last few years. She had an idea, a vision, she called it, for a high-end wellness boutique. It was a beautiful dream, full of artisanal soaps and ethically sourced yoga mats. It was also a financial black hole waiting to happen, backed by a business plan that was more of a hopeful prayer than a viable strategy. She needed a significant investment, an amount that would have eaten away most of my retirement savings, the nest egg my late husband, Robert, and I had painstakingly built over 40 years of careful work. "It's not just money, Mom. It's a belief in me," she had pleaded, her voice rising with frustration. "Don't you believe in me? How do you tell your child that you believe in her, but not in her judgment? How do you explain that the caution you've learned from a lifetime of responsibilities isn't a personal slight, but a shield you wish you could lend them?" I tried. I spoke of risk, of the market, of the need for a more solid foundation. I offered to help her refine the plan, to pay for a consultant, to co-sign a smaller, more manageable loan. But every practical suggestion I made was received as an insult, another brick in the wall of my disapproval. "You just don't want me to be independent," she'd spat, crossing her arms. "You want me to stay your little girl forever, the one who needs you for everything." "That's not true, Emily," I said, my voice quiet, trying to douse the flames. "I want you to be successful, but I also want you to be safe. What I have is for my old age, for security. Your father worked his entire life for that." "Oh, here we go. Dad," she scoffed, and that was the twist of the knife. Dad would have believed in me. He wouldn't have hidden behind excuses. The mention of Robert was a low blow. He had been the dreamer, the one who always saw the best in every situation. I had been the anchor, the one who made sure his dreams had a foundation to land on. We were a team. But in Emily's revisionist history, I was merely the obstacle to her ambitions, and now, to her inheritance. The argument escalated, her voice growing louder, wilder, as I held my ground, my refusal solidifying with every reckless accusation she threw. It was then, at the peak of her fury, when she saw she would not get what she wanted, that she delivered the blow. The gift? My death. I didn't shout back. I didn't cry. A strange and terrible clarity washed over me. The love was still there, a deep foundational bedrock of my being, but it was suddenly covered by a layer of something cold and hard as granite. It was the understanding that the person I had loved unconditionally saw our relationship as a transaction, one in which my only remaining value was in my absence. She must have seen the shift in my eyes. Her anger faltered for a second, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "Mom, I raised a hand, not in anger, but in a gesture of finality. "There is nothing more to say, Emily." My voice was steady, eerily calm. "You have made your feelings perfectly clear." That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the dark, the silence of the house now a comforting blanket. The grief was there, a deep, aching void. But beneath it, a seed of resolve was planting itself. She saw me as a collection of assets, a signature on a series of documents, a will, a trust, a deed. She wanted the gift of my death. Fine. I would give her the next best thing. I would give her a life without my resources. I would erase her name from every document I had ever signed. It would not be an act of rage. It would be an act of acceptance. I would finally believe what she had just told me, that to her, I was already gone. The next morning, I moved through the quiet house like a ghost, a specter in my own life. The sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, indifferent star in the galaxy of my grief. There were no frantic calls from Emily, no barrage of texts filled with regret or apology. The silence from her was as profound as the silence in the house, a confirmation of the chasm that had opened between us. It was a void she had created, and I was no longer willing to be the only one trying to build a bridge across it. By 9 o'clock, I had showered, dressed in a simple but formal blouse and slacks, and made a phone call that felt both monumental and utterly mundane. I called Arthur Vance, our family lawyer for over 30 years. Arthur had drafted our first wills when Robert and I were young parents, his office smelling of old books and fresh coffee. He had helped us set up the trust after Robert's diagnosis, his gentle voice a steady presence in a world that was tilting off its axis. He knew our family's history, our finances, and our hearts. "Catherine," he answered, his voice warm and familiar. "What can I do for you this fine morning?" "Arthur, I need to come in," I said, my tone leaving no room for pleasantries. "I need to make some significant changes to my estate plan. To everything." There was a brief pause. Arthur was too professional to pry, but he could read the temperature of a conversation better than anyone I knew. "Of course," he said, his voice softening with concern. "Is everything all right?" "I will be," I replied, the words tasting like ash and iron. "Is today possible? This afternoon? I'll clear my schedule, come at 2. The hours leading up to the appointment were surreal. I walked through the rooms of my house, the home where I had measured Emily's height against a doorframe, where I had nursed her through fevers, where I had held her as she cried over her first broken heart. Every object held a memory, a phantom limb of the love I had nurtured. The worn armchair where I read her bedtime stories, the faint scratch on the hardwood floor from the time she tried to roller skate inside. These were not just things. They were artifacts of a shared life, a life that, according to her, was now just an obstacle. I gathered the documents Arthur would need: a copy of the current will, the trust agreements, the deed to the house, the statements for my investment portfolios. Laying them out on the dining room table, I saw my life quantified in paper and ink. Robert's signature was next to mine on so many of them, a silent testament to our partnership. We had built this together for our future, and for hers. The irony was corrosive. She wanted the fruits of a life she had just fundamentally devalued. In Arthur's office, the scent of old books and coffee was the same, a constant in a world that had become unrecognizable. He greeted me with a sad, knowing look and gestured for me to sit. He didn't press for details immediately. He simply waited. "I want to remove Emily as a beneficiary," I said, the words stark and ugly in the quiet room. "From everything. The will, the trust. I want to change the power of attorney and the healthcare directive. I want her name gone." Arthur steepled his fingers, his kind eyes studying my face. "Catherine, that is a profound step. Are you certain you want to do this? Fights happen. Words are said." "This wasn't just a fight, Arthur," I interrupted, my voice cracking for the first time. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. She wished me dead. She told me the best gift I could give her would be if I died, because she wanted the money. There is no coming back from that. It's not about punishing her. It's about believing her. She sees our relationship as a transaction. Well, the transaction is over. I explained the argument, the coldness in her eyes, the utter finality of her words. As I spoke, the last of my hesitation crumbled. Reliving it, articulating the sheer, calculated cruelty of it, solidified my resolve. This wasn't a mother's angry overreaction. This was a response to a fundamental betrayal. Arthur listened patiently, his expression growing more somber with every word. He knew Emily. He had bounced her on his knee as a child. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. "All right, Catherine," he said finally, his voice heavy. "Legally, it is straightforward. You are of sound mind, and it is your estate to direct as you wish. We will dissolve the existing trust and create a new one. We will draft a new will. Who then do you want as your beneficiary?" The question caught me off guard. In my focus on removing Emily, I hadn't thought about what would come next. My life had been so centered on her. The assumption was always that she would be the one to inherit our legacy. Who else was there? A blank space opened up in front of me, vast and empty. I looked out the window at the city below. "A charity," I said, the idea forming as I spoke. Something Robert would have liked. An animal shelter, or a scholarship fund for engineering students. Something that builds, that helps. Something that will put good into the world, without entitlement, without expectation. Arthur nodded slowly, a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. "We can certainly do that. I will start drafting the new documents. It will take some time. You will need to come back in a few days to sign them." As I left his office and stepped out into the afternoon sun, I didn't feel vengeful or victorious. I felt hollowed out, I had just surgically removed my own daughter from my life, from my legacy. It was an amputation of the heart. But as I walked toward my car, a new feeling began to creep in. Faint, but persistent. It was the feeling of a weight being lifted. The weight of her expectations, of her resentment, of a one-sided love that had become an unbearable burden. For the first time in years, I was no longer responsible for her happiness. My life, and what I did with it, was entirely my own again. The days that followed were a study in duality. On the surface, my life was quieter, simpler. The phone no longer felt like a potential source of conflict. I drank my morning coffee without the low-grade anxiety of wondering what new financial crisis or personal drama would be the subject of Emily's next call. I read books, gardened, and went for long walks in the park, activities I had once loved but had somehow relegated to the periphery of a life spent worrying about my daughter. There was a strange, almost forgotten peace in the return to my own rhythm. But beneath that placid surface, grief churned. It would ambush me at the most unexpected moments. I'd be in the grocery store and see a young woman with the same fiery red hair as Emily, and my breath would catch in my throat. I'd be cooking dinner and automatically start to make her favorite dish before realizing, with a fresh stab of pain, that she wouldn't be coming to eat it. The house was full of her ghost. Her high school graduation photo on the mantelpiece seemed to mock me with the memory of a smiling, hopeful girl who bore no resemblance to the cold stranger who had wished for my death. For a week, I did nothing about the photo. I let it sit there, a testament to my own paralysis. But one morning, fueled by a sleepless night, I took it down. I didn't smash it or throw it away. I simply wrapped it in a soft cloth and placed it in a box in the attic, alongside her childhood drawings and the bronzed baby shoes I had treasured for decades. It wasn't an act of erasure, but of acceptance. That version of Emily was gone. I could no longer live in a museum dedicated to her memory. With that small act, something shifted. The resolve I had found in Arthur's office began to solidify into a plan. I had told him I wanted to leave my estate to charity, but the idea was still abstract. Now I needed it to be real. I started my research, not just as a task, but as an anchor. I spent hours online looking into local organizations. I remembered what I had said, almost as an afterthought: an animal shelter. Robert and I had always had dogs, a succession of scruffy, lovable mutts from the local rescue. After he passed, I couldn't bring myself to get another. The thought of coming home to that unconditional, slobbery affection felt like a betrayal of his memory. But now, the idea felt different. It felt like a tribute. I found a no-kill shelter on the other side of town, one that focused on rescuing older dogs, the ones who were often overlooked. The website was full of pictures of gray-muzzled, soulful-eyed creatures waiting for a second chance. The next day, I drove there. The air inside was a cacophony of barks and smelled faintly of disinfectant and hope. A kind-faced woman named Maria showed me around. I explained I was interested in becoming a volunteer, perhaps helping with their finances or grant writing. As she led me past the kennels, I saw him. He was a large, brindled dog, a mix of something noble and something scrappy. His face was almost entirely white with age, and one of his ears flopped down at a funny angle. While the other dogs barked and jumped for attention, he simply lay on his bed, his old eyes following me with a weary intelligence. His kennel card said his name was Barney, and he was 12 years old. His owners had surrendered him when they moved into a retirement community that didn't allow pets. My heart ached with a force that surprised me. I saw in him a reflection of my own feelings, discarded, quiet, but with a spirit that wasn't quite extinguished. I spent half an hour sitting on the floor outside his kennel, speaking to him in a low voice. He didn't get up, but he thumped his tail, a slow, steady rhythm against the concrete floor. I left the shelter that day with a volunteer application in my purse, and the image of Barney seared into my mind. The world felt a little bigger, a little less empty. I had found a place where a lifetime of experience, my skills in bookkeeping, my patience, my quiet nature, could be a gift, not a burden. A few days later, Arthur called. "The documents are ready, Catherine. You can come in and sign them whenever you're free." Returning to his office felt different this time. The weight of the initial decision was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. He laid the thick stack of papers on the polished table between us. The new will, the revocation of the old trust, the establishment of the new one, the updated powers of attorney. My name, Catherine Alistair Hayes, was there. But where Emily's name had once been, there was now the name of a foundation I had asked Arthur to create, the Robert Hayes and Barney Fund, dedicated to supporting local animal rescues and engineering scholarships. The name felt right. It honored my husband's legacy, and acknowledged the new, small flicker of hope in my own life. Arthur explained each document carefully, but my mind was clear. I understood what I was doing. When he was finished, he pushed a heavy blue ink pen across the table. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice gentle. I picked up the pen. It felt cool and solid in my hand. For a fleeting second, the face of the little girl who had given me a bouquet of dandelions flashed in my mind. The pain was still there, a phantom ache for a limb that was no longer part of me, but it was no longer a paralyzing agony. It was a scar, a part of my history, but not my future. I thought of Emily's cold eyes and her cruel words. I thought of Barney's thumping tail. I thought of Robert's gentle smile. I took a breath and began to sign. With each stroke of the pen, I felt not anger, but liberation. I was not destroying a future. I was creating a new one, my own. The signing of the documents was not an end, but a beginning. 2 days later, I drove back to the shelter, my heart a nervous drum against my ribs. I filled out the adoption paperwork for Barney. Maria, the manager, looked at me with a warmth that went beyond professional courtesy. "He's a special old soul," she said, signing off on the forms. "He's been waiting for someone like you." Bringing Barney home was a revelation. The house, which had felt so cavernous and silent, was suddenly filled with the soft click-clack of his nails on the hardwood floor and his gentle rumbling snores as he slept at the foot of my bed. He asked for nothing but a soft place to land, a gentle hand, and a full bowl. In return, he gave me a reason to get up in the morning. Our walks became the anchors of my day, his slow, steady pace forcing me to notice the world again, the color of the autumn leaves, the laughter of children in the park, the smell of rain on pavement. He was a quiet companion, a living, breathing presence that soothed the raw edges of my grief. My work at the shelter became my purpose. I threw myself into it, organizing their chaotic financial records into neat, orderly spreadsheets. I wrote grant proposals, my words flowing with a passion that surprised me. For the first time, I was using the skills I had honed over a lifetime, not just to build a safety net, but to create a lifeline for creatures who had been thrown away. I made friends, other volunteers who, like me, had found a sense of belonging in this haven of second chances. My life had a new shape, one defined by quiet contribution and mutual affection. Months passed. The sharp, constant pain of Emily's betrayal had faded into a dull, permanent ache. It was a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had not heard a single word from her since that terrible afternoon. No calls, no texts, not even a message through a mutual acquaintance. It was as if I had truly ceased to exist for her, just as she had wished. I had accepted it. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct made me answer. "Mom?" The voice was thin, reedy, a pale imitation of Emily's usual confident tone. My hand tightened on the receiver. I said nothing. "Mom, are you there? It's me. I need your help." The story came tumbling out. A torrent of debt, bad decisions, and shattered dreams. The wellness boutique had been a catastrophic failure. She had gone through her own savings, then maxed out credit cards, then taken out high-interest loans from predatory lenders. The dream had become a nightmare of collection calls and eviction notices. She was crying now, the desperate, hiccuping sobs of a child who has fallen and scraped her knees, but this was a wound no kiss from her mother could heal. "I'm going to lose everything, Mom," she wept. "I'm so scared. I just need a loan, a big one, to pay everyone off and get back on my feet. Please, I know you have it." I listened, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Barney, sensing my distress, came and rested his heavy head on my lap. I stroked his soft ear. The Catherine of a year ago would have caved. She would have drained her accounts, sacrificed her security, all to save her daughter from the consequences of her own actions. But I was not that Catherine anymore. "No, Emily," I said, my voice quiet but firm. There was a stunned silence on the other end. What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no. I will not give you the money." "But it's me, I'm your daughter. You have to help me." Her voice was rising, laced with disbelief and a familiar thread of indignant anger. "It's my inheritance anyway. What difference does it make if I get some of it now?" And there it was. The transactional view of our relationship, laid bare once more. She didn't see me. She saw a bank, a resource to be tapped. The last flicker of my own sentimental weakness died out. "There is no inheritance, Emily," I said, my voice devoid of malice, a simple statement of fact. "What are you talking about? Of course there is. Dad's money, the house. Your father and I built a life and a legacy. You made it clear you had no respect for that life. You told me the best gift I could give you was to die. I took you at your word. I accepted that in your heart you had already written me off, so I made it official. You have been completely disinherited. My will, the trust, all of it. Your name is gone. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't the heavy, angry silence of our last fight. It was a hollow, ringing void. I could almost hear the gears in her mind grinding to a halt. The entire world she had built on a foundation of entitlement and expectation collapsing into dust. You can't be serious, she whispered, her voice trembling. You wouldn't do that. You're my mother. I am, I said, and the sadness was immense, a vast ocean of it. And as my final act of motherhood, I am giving you the one thing you have never had, the full weight of your own choices. This is the life you have made, Emily. I truly hope you find the strength to navigate it. Goodbye. I hung up the phone before she could respond. I did not cry. I sat there for a long time, stroking Barney's head, the steady rhythm of his breathing a comforting anchor in the storm of my emotions. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a profound and bottomless sorrow for the daughter I had lost and for the woman she had become. But for the first time, her choices were not my burden to carry. My legacy was not a prize for her to claim, but a gift to a world that was grateful for it. That evening, I walked Barney under a sky full of stars. The air was crisp and clean. My life was not the one I had planned, but it was a good life. It was a quiet life. It was my own. And I was finally at peace.